Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Waxman-Bakshi. Today is December 1st, 2024, and this is the live daily briefing of the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's Office. We are live on Instagram, X, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and available afterwards wherever you get your podcasts. Please start submitting questions in the chat, and as always, like and subscribe to help us reach a wider audience. The Houthis tried to murder me again today. Isn't it sad that I'm not surprised? And neither are you. Around 6 a.m. this morning, a ballistic missile from Yemen was intercepted over central Israel. Millions of people ran to bomb shelters. There is technically a ceasefire between Iran's terror army in Lebanon, Hezbollah, and Israel. There is no ceasefire between Iran's terror pirates in Yemen, the Houthis, and Israel. And there is no ceasefire between Iran and Israel. Over the weekend, there were drones intercepted from the east, that usually means Iraq, and from the west, which covers many of Iran's proxies. There was also a terror attack on a bus in Samaria, and a major Iranian weapons shipment was caught there too. Israel's people are fighting for our lives on 7 fronts. The Houthis call for death to Israel and a curse upon the Jews. But like Hezbollah, they get their money and weapons from the Islamic Republic. Iran continues to light a ring of fire around Israel, and Israel will continue to extinguish the Iranian inferno and protect our people. In Gaza, Israel continues to degrade the remnants of Hamas and prevent them from rebuilding. Yesterday, Israel eliminated a terrorist who took part in the October 7th massacre. He also worked for a humanitarian group, the World Central Kitchen, WCK. WCK said they were heartbroken to hear of his death. Shouldn't WCK instead be heartbroken that they had employed a terrorist? Aid agencies must stop employing Hamas terrorists. WCK isn't alone. We've seen how thoroughly groups like UNRWA are compromised by Hamas. We need to ask, how many Gaza aid workers are Hamas murderers? How many Gaza aid workers cynically use humanitarian jobs as camouflage for inhumane acts? And now, here's some other news from the Gaza Strip. Hamas released a sign of life video depicting US citizen Idan Alexander. Israel's prime minister reportedly told his mother that conditions are right to free them all and bring them home. But do you know what's really frightening? Last week, 14 countries at the UN Security Council voted to tell Israel to cease fire in Gaza without the hostages. United Kingdom, France, Switzerland, Japan, and South Korea joined countries like China and Russia. They were only stopped by a US veto. Mandy Damari, mother of hostage and UK citizen Emily, called out the UK and others. If it weren't for the US veto, it would have been a death sentence for our loved ones. Hamas would have no reason to release them. I find it absolutely appalling that the UK clearly doesn't care much about its own citizen being held in Hamas captivity for 422 days. Call on your leaders. Pressure the terrorists and their backers to let our hostages go. Don't encourage Hamas to execute them. Now let's take some questions from our audience watching live on social media.
Thank you, Ashley. Our first question is from John on X. Is there peace between Israel and Lebanon now? Is Hezbollah done fighting?
So it's important to recognize that a ceasefire that has gone into effect with Lebanon is a ceasefire. It doesn't mean peace. It is not the end goal. Our end goal here in Israel is always to have peace with all of our neighbors. A ceasefire means that there is a pause, a cease in the fire. Unfortunately, as we've seen over the past few days, in fact, since less than 24 hours after the ceasefire came into effect, Hezbollah is violating the ceasefire. So we've seen how Hezbollah militants have tried to go back down south. Luckily, Israel has been stopping them. We've been seeing shipments coming in from Syria to Lebanon of weapons. We're seeing weapons being moved around. We're seeing rocket launchers being prepared. So it's important to take into account that although there is a ceasefire with Lebanon, we won't have real quiet. Sorry, there's a ceasefire with Hezbollah. There won't be real quiet until we have peace with Lebanon.
Thank you. Jessica on Instagram asks, how does the fighting in Syria affect Israel and Hezbollah?
So it's a difficult question. We're still waiting to see what's going to happen there. But for those of you who don't know, there are rebels that are fighting right now in Syria against the Syrian regime of Assad. It's very interesting to see how Hezbollah, who has played a role in Lebanon, also has been playing a role, not just recently, but historically in Syria as well, aiding the regime in murdering civilians, Palestinians, for example. So it's really interesting right now to see whether Hezbollah is going to choose to put its efforts in what is happening in Syria or to continue placing its efforts in murdering Israelis. I think we're going to have to wait a few more days and weeks to see what happens in Syria. And I think here in Israel, we are keeping a close watch, of course, on our northern border.
Katie on Instagram asks, do we know when the 60,000 displaced Israelis will be able to return back home to the north?
So the general plan, the general guidelines is to wait until the 60-day initial period of the ceasefire, in which Israeli troops are supposed to slowly withdraw back into Israeli territory as the Lebanese military and UNIFIL and other international organizations are supposed to come and replace the Israeli troops to make sure that Hezbollah does not maintain power in the south of Lebanon. So it is not yet possible for the displaced Israelis to return to their homes until we see the end of this 2-month period. And then I think the general plan is to slowly have everyone come back to the north. But it's important to say, and I'm not from the north, but I will say something on behalf of the Israelis who are displaced, is that just because a ceasefire is taken into effect, many Israelis are very skeptic about the safety of returning back to the north, especially if we see that Hezbollah is able to rearm, just like how we saw they broke they violated the UN Resolution 1701 in 2006, where they came close to the border and got strongholds and weapons and, basically prepared for the same type of massacre that we saw on October 7th. We saw that how they were preparing for a much bigger scale attack, but one similar to what we've seen on October 7th. So the Israeli civilians who should be going back to the north are kind of still waiting to see what's going to happen and how the Israeli military will react to any violation. And I think it's important to say that because Israel has learned its lesson following Resolution 1701, we're going to see a very different strategy implemented by the Israeli military. There's not going to be any tolerance to weapons or Hezbollah sitting on its northern border.
Thank you. This is our final question from X. Are there any updates on the hostages other than the recent video released? And has there been any response that we know of from the US government, considering the hostage was an American citizen?
Unfortunately, there is no news to share. And I have certainly not seen enough. I have seen a few very pro-Israeli politicians in the US tweet things here and there. But other than that, no, unfortunately. In fact, quite the contrary. On the very day that a video is released of a U.S. citizen Israeli hostage, we saw President Biden carrying a book which basically takes away Israel's right to exist in the first place. And so, unfortunately, we have not been seeing the reaction that we would like to see coming out of the U.S. administration, the current U.S. administration. So thank you very much for watching. We'd also like to remind you that Giving Tuesday is this week. So to help support us in our mission, please visit our website or go to the Giving Tuesday link across our social media. Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. Israel time and 8 a.m. East Coast time. Have a good day.